Hello, faithful, and welcome to the 49ers Plus podcast. I'm Al Moriello, and this is your source for the most objective 49ers discussion, all smart takes without the clickbait. And today we're going to be discussing some roster moves the 49ers made this week, what impact, if any, some of these moves are going to have. We're going to discuss the idea that youth is finally being served on the 49ers roster beyond the usual suspects from this draft class. And then we're going to jump into the 49ers hosting the Cardinals on Sunday. Big matchup atop the NFC West. Like the full breakdown and my prediction for this NFC West tilt. So let's get right into everything. And let's start off with some roster moves that the 49ers made that you guys may be aware of. Offensive left guard Ben Barch has been placed on IR with the potential to return. And in a corresponding move, they promoted tight end Braden Willis to the active roster. This made sense on a lot of levels. Ben Barch had a high ankle sprain. It was going to be at least a 4-week injury. So this frees up a roster spot if they wanted to bring in another offensive lineman, which they did not, because promoting Braden Willis to the 53-man roster was smart. He only had 2 more promotions left, which would have been week 3 and week 4. And that's would have been okay if it's guaranteed that Kittle returns week 5. We haven't heard anything regarding that either way. So needing a third tight end on the roster or for game days, Willis gets the promotion. Barch is on IR, and the 49ers still have 9 offensive linemen on the active roster. They went with 10 to start the season, which I thought was a little heavy, or at least one more than I thought that they were going to roll with. I thought they were going to roll with 9. They still have 9. And Connor Colby, who played really, really well in replacement of Ben Barch, allowed 0 pressures. One of 5 rookie linemen, actually, week 2 to allow 0 pressures, will be starting. And as long as he plays 80% of what he did week 2 at New Orleans, he's not going to be giving that job back anytime soon. But with the 9 offensive linemen, backup left tackle Spencer Burford hurt his knee. He, I believe, is questionable for the game. So that means backup right tackle Austin Pleasance may be active for week 3 as the swing tackle against Arizona, with your interior backups being Matt Hennessy and Drew Moss if Spencer Burford can't go and he is inactive. The Niners signed tackle Brandon Parker to the practice squad. He was with the Niners for a bit last season. So he joins other offensive linemen on the practice squad: center Drake Nugent, guard center Nick Zakiel, and tackle Killen Zier on the International Pathway Program as the 4th offensive lineman on the roster, which is a good move to have an extra tackle. Not that Brandon Parker is a starter really at this point in his career. He's on the practice squad for a reason. He was on the street a week ago for a reason. But to have another tackle on the practice squad to play a backup role, another guard or center in Zakiel on the practice squad to play a backup role should anything happen to a Hennessy or a Moss if they get into any playing time, or even in practice if they get hurt. At least you're elevating a player in Zakiel and in Brandon Parker who has experience in this league. They might not have, especially Nick Zakiel's case, hasn't started a bunch of reps or started a bunch of games, had a bunch of live game reps. Brandon Parker with more, but at least you have some veterans behind your backups on the practice squad. And one last news and note in terms of roster moves: defensive end Robert Beal, who was released last week to make room for Curtis Robinson at linebacker to be promoted to the 53, is on the practice squad. He's on the practice squad injured portion of the practice squad, at least per the 49ers website. So another D end in addition to Gibson at linebacker, defensive end, and 2 defensive tackles in Sebastian Valdez and Evan Anderson. So 4 players, again, behind your backups on the 53 that you have on the practice squad that you can go to if needed. Not saying any one of them is, Evan Anderson has started in this league last season, but you have additional bodies you can go through if any part of this season becomes another war of attrition like 2024 was. And I guess like 2025 started out between Ayuk, Robinson suspended, Kittle on IR, Brock missing time, Jennings being banged up, the defense at least somewhat healthy. And the only real disappointment has been rookie linebacker Nick Martin, who's been inactive the first 2 weeks of the season. And that will probably continue with Curtis Robinson elevated to the 53. Unless there's an injury, Nick Martin is not going to be active for the foreseeable future. And that hasn't been brought up really anywhere. Nobody's talking about it. It's not a big deal because of the play you're getting, obviously, from Fred Warner and from D Winters and Luke Gifford, Tatum Bethune, Curtis Robinson. So Nick Martin is right now linebacker 6, and it would take some shuffling or injuries to get him on the field. He's a player that had obviously some ups and downs in the preseason. The severe down was week 1 against the Broncos, then performed better against the Raiders. And I've maybe getting the preseason ever. It was only a month ago, and it feels like a lifetime ago for me. But Nick Martin obviously not going anywhere, and no one's complaining about it because the defense is playing well. If they were 1-1 or 0-2 and D Winters looked like a hot mess, there might be a push or questioning from the media. But I haven't even heard, and I've listened to, I think, all the press conferences. I might have missed something, don't get me wrong, but I haven't heard anybody question anyone about Nick Martin or really anything on social media. It goes to show what good play does. D Winters finally realizing, at least early this season, 2-game sample, some of his potential next to Fred Warner. And when Nick Bosa was asked, I don't know if you guys saw this, if D Winters looked like Dre Greenlaw on the field, Nick Bosa's response was, well, I don't really think they look alike, but they play in a similar fashion, which I don't know if Nick Bosa was joking or he didn't understand the question. Either way, I got a chuckle out of that. So the linebacking core, maybe a little bit deeper than we thought to begin the season. Again, 2-game sample, a lot can happen with injuries and whatnot. But at least for the first 2 games, you want things trending upward. Are there things for the Niners offense, defense, special teams to work on? Absolutely. But they won 2 games, 2 hard-fought games that were losses last year or would have been losses last year. But as it stands, the Niners are 2-0, 1-0 in the West, and 2-0 so far in the NFC with a big NFC West game upcoming, which we're going to get to momentarily. Let's talk about the youth. When Charvarius Ward was not re-signed, and Dre Greenlaw and Talanoa Hufanga, Leonard Floyd was let go, Javon Hargrave was let go, at least on defense, right, was the bigger makeover in terms of the youth movement. We knew that young players were going to get some playing time. It was just a matter of how much, and you saw some we'll use the word optimistic, I'll call it ridiculous, projections in the preseason that the Niners might have 6 rookies starting on defense. Now that could happen at some point this season. To me, and I was very vocal about it, if you've been listening to the podcast, that was never going to happen. The ceiling was 3 for basically the first month of the season. And it was Mykel Williams, it's Upton Stout, and Marquise Siegel. And it was either going to be between Siegel and Nick Martin. And obviously Nick Martin has fallen off or just not doing what he needs to do, proving it to Robert Saleh and the coaching staff that he should be one of the top even 5 linebackers at this point. But in week 2, 13.8% of all snaps, offense and defense, and I guess you want to call it, include special teams as well, went to rookies on the 49ers. That was the 4th most snaps for rookies in week 2, behind only New England, Cleveland, and Miami. 3 garbage teams. And while a lot of people out there probably thought that the Niners were going to rebuild, that, the Rams are going to run away with the division, and people thought, the Niners could probably finish no better than 3rd, maybe even 4th. You see, even in power rankings now, after 2 weeks, the Niners are like, anywhere between maybe 11th and 16th. out of the top 50, a 2-0 team out of the top 15 teams in the league. Yeah, but we know better, right? Now we're maybe a little bit more optimistic. We follow the team more closely than a lot of people posting on social media or a lot of national media talking heads, right? But sometimes we can't see the forest for the trees because we follow teams so closely. We overvalue players. All fans do. All fans maybe think their team is better than they are, or the opposite is true. If you're a Jets fan or a Browns fan or a Titans fan, you probably think your team is worse than Dolphins fan than maybe they actually are. But with all this youth on defense that Salah was going to play and shuffle in and out each game, each month throughout the remainder of the season, we knew that there was going to be growing pains. And there has been, right? Nothing's been perfect. Upton Stout is probably the one player that has experienced the most because he's been on the field. Nick Martin, there's no growing pains because he's not on the field. CJ West, only about 10 snaps in week 2. And around that, maybe I think 6 or 7 week 1. But there hasn't been a liability yet. Yes, Upton Stout week 1 gave up, and I was pissed about it, gave up a holding on Cooper Kupp in the end zone on 4th down, giving Seattle new life, and Seattle wound up getting 7 points out of it. Marquise Siegel, guarding Juwan Johnson, the tight end for the Saints, lets up basically a back shoulder fade to a much bigger tight end, but he was in pretty good position. There are going to be rookie mistakes as the season goes on. I think, Salah would agree with this, that you just hope that they maybe don't make the same mistake twice or maybe 3 times because everything's happening still so fast for rookies. Who knows, what the matchups are for a D lineman going against an O lineman or Upton Stout against a receiver, Siegel dropping down to cover a receiver, tight end. Sometimes the matchups are going to favor the offense, right? If you're talking about one-on-ones for some of these rookies. But with this 13.8%, the 49ers, and I've been saying this for a couple of months, I don't want to say since after the draft, because we still had no idea how these rookies were going to pan out, right? Everybody looks good in the spring. Everyone looks good at the combine in shorts and a t-shirt. Everyone looks good in spring. OTAs, it's the season of hope. You don't know until they start stepping on the field. And even training camp, you don't know. Even preseason, you don't go. Now the rubber has hit the road the first 2 weeks of the season. And the rookies, while not dominating, and nor should they, I think are performing better than maybe we could have thought and have been key parts to this 2-0 start, complementing the older players, the veterans, the talented veterans in Bosa, in Demo, in Fred Warner. And then you have other complementary veterans between Jordan Elliott and Yetur Gross-Matos, Renardo Green's in his 2nd season, Jair Brown in his 3rd, Jason Pinnock at safety in his, I believe, 5th season. And the offense could be a totally, separate discussion. But let's talk about the names in terms of the rookie starters coming up in week 4. Mykel Williams, Marquise Siegel, Upton Stout on defense, and Connor Colby on offense is going to start, again, due to injury, like Dominic Pooney had that fortunate Feliciano getting hurt in front of him, was able to get that starting spot and run with it. Brock Purdy 3 years ago, 2 QBs get hurt in front of him, gets the starting spot, performs well, and runs with it. Hopefully Connor Colby is the next in, if you want to say maybe, hopefully a long line of 7th round picks that wind up being starters for the 49ers. You can throw Juwan Jennings in there, right? Still with the team. Eli Mitchell, I know, was a 6th round pick, but started some games when he was with San Francisco. He's with the Chiefs now, I think. And I watched some of that Chiefs Eagle game on replay last night. I didn't see him in at all. I'd have to check stat sheets after this to see if he's gotten any playing time at all. So you have 4 rookies starting out of 22 spots. So that's what, 20% essentially, a little less. 18% of your players are starters, are rookies, are starters on this team. And that's not to mention Alfred Collins, who doubled his snap count from week 1 to week 2. And he's a player, big dude. You hear it from all the reports, right? As long as he keeps his pads low, and he's 6'5", so it's hard for him to keep his pads low. But when he does, he is difficult to handle, and he will only get more so if he refines his technique. CJ West getting more snaps again at D tackle from week 1 to week 2. And we talked about Nick Martin being inactive. So those are the year 1 players. You're talking about 6 rookies making significant contributions. And, that's not counting, obviously, Jordan James at running back hasn't played yet. Jordan Watkins at receiver hasn't played yet. Curtis Rourke at quarterback, recovering from the ACL tear, hasn't played yet. These are players that'll especially Rourke, will feature hopefully more prominently in future years. And Jordan James could get some run this year. Jordan Watkins can get some run this year, but I think him missing so much time in preseason, and now I'm recording this on Thursday night. Apparently, he experienced some sort of a calf injury or tightness. He was limited in practice on Thursday. He wasn't on Wednesday. I don't know if they're just setting the stage for him to be put on IR when Demarcus Robinson comes back. Not the Niners have to make it look good, quote unquote. But when Demarcus Robinson returns, I'm hoping it's Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Let's keep the rookie receiver on the roster and just make him one of the inactives every week. And maybe MVS goes to the practice squad. But you obviously have some rookies that aren't contributing. And if we actually thought that, a 10-person rookie class was all going to contribute on this team, this was not, the Niners were not an expansion team. You had people like Larry Krueger, who's obviously a well-respected journalist. He and I had a dialogue on Twitter saying that he thinks the Niners need to have a 15-man draft class, 15 players, rookies to make the roster or more. And it wound up actually being 11 with Drew Moss, but Curtis Rourke doesn't really count. Once he was drafted, you knew that's a redshirt year for him. So it's still essentially 10 rookies that are on the team, and that's 20% of your roster, right? 10 out of 53. And there might be, there's at least one more on the practice squad with cornerback Jacob Robinson. So those are your first-year players. Now, year 2, you have a starter in Renardo Green. You have a backup linebacker in Tatum Bethune, Ricky Pearsall. Right now, a starting receiver, Dominic Pooney, starting right guard. So 4 impact, at least 3 impact players out of last year's draft class with Tatum Bethune, to be determined. You did get some good usage out of Guerendo at running back. Obviously pushed down the depth chart with Brian Robinson coming aboard. And then the year 3 players, Sam O on the defensive line, the defensive end, Darrell Luter, still on the roster, still under his rookie contract. Chase Lucas, brought over from the Lions, but a young player. Jair Brown at safety. D. Winters obviously elevating his game thus far. And Jake Tonjes, although he was an undrafted rookie out of Cal on the practice squad last year, another young player who has made an impact, certainly a big impact week 1 with that, go-ahead game-winning touchdown at Seattle, and needing to fill in for George Kittle, assuming the pass-catching responsibilities and blocking and fullback if Juice isn't able to go this week. So of those players, of rookies year 2 and year 3, and there's other rookies we talked about that aren't really making an impact just yet, other year 2 players that aren't making an impact just yet, and other year 3 players as well that are backups. But of the players that I listed, that's 30% of the roster. 30% of the roster, you have players playing meaningful snaps. Now, some more than others, like Darrell Luter, Chase Lucas. Chase Lucas looked really good in the preseason. Darrell Luter was getting a lot of run as a starting cornerback opposite Dallas Flowers. So you have like maybe a shade under 30%, say 27, 28% of your players are either rookies, second year or third year players under rookie contracts that are making a significant contribution or in the process of making a significant contribution for San Francisco. And that was obviously priority number 1 for John Lynch and company this past offseason, was to get younger, faster, and cheaper, right? They got rid of high-priced players, brought in younger players, and right now the production drop-off is minimal to non-existent and amplified by the fact that you released a D coordinator, Nick Sorensen, who was well over his head, and brought in a familiar face and experienced defensive play caller. You want to call him mastermind. I don't think he's obviously of the ilk of a Steve Spagnuolo just yet, but a ridiculously major upgrade over Nick Sorensen. And I said last year, with the Niners being 6-11, you can count a loss or two to special teams, 2 losses on health, and 2 losses on Nick Sorensen. Say 1 on special teams. That's 5 more wins that the Niners would have had, even with a somewhat depleted roster, right? If it was just Robert Saleh, they're probably a 9-win team. If they had half the number of injuries, maybe they win another game or 2. And if special teams didn't crap the bed at times, they might have won another game or 2. Let's just say a game. So that's why when people were using the excuses of, oh, you can't use the excuses of injuries or a D coordinator or whatever, look how bad the Eagles offense looks losing its offensive coordinator. Jalen Hurts is yet to throw a touchdown. He has more tush push plays than passes completed over 10 yards. And even last year's offense wasn't all that great. Jalen Hurts is one of the few quarterbacks, a handful, maybe 3 or 4 quarterbacks in NFL history that made it to a Super Bowl throwing for under 3,000 yards. And obviously, you would think players from the 70s, Bob Greasy, I think, was one of them, when throwing isn't as easy and popular as it is now. Were quarterbacks of that ilk that made it to a Super Bowl throwing for such a paltry amount. And when the Eagles coming off their first Super Bowl appearance against the Chiefs, when they lost both coordinators, and that team did not look the same. So these things obviously matter. Youth, the energy, the fresh bodies, the cheaper contracts, and then energized more so by Saleh and his scheme and how he is certainly putting defensive players in a better position than Nick Sorensen was. The arrow is pointing up for this team and this defense. The mix of veteran, if it was all young players like the Rams had last year, it would have taken maybe, I think, a little bit longer for their Niners to get their footing. And I think they're the best play is still ahead of the defense, right? We're only 2 weeks into the season. We'll see how they do against Arizona. And that's the segue. Niners hosting the Cardinals. Niners right now are a 2.5-point favorite at home. The over-under is 44.5. Arizona opened, at least the sports books I saw, as a 1.5-point favorite, which meant at the time that on a neutral field, the Cardinals were 4.5 points better than the 49ers. Right now, a 2.5, Niners being favored by 2.5 points means on a neutral field, it's a pick 'em. Now, interesting stat that you guys may not be aware of. Kyle, since he joined the team, Coach Shanahan, 16 meetings against the Arizona Cardinals in his first 8 years. He is under 500 against them, 7-9. Now, you would think, obviously, he's owned the Rams. Outside of last year, they dropped both, but before then, he had an extensive winning streak. And then obviously, 2017-18, team wasn't that good. They were getting beaten up upon. But you would figure out of those 4 teams, the Rams, Seattle, and the Cardinals, that he would have the best record, or maybe second best record against Arizona. He's got the worst record against the Cardinals in the division. And they've had Kyler Murray for, I think, maybe almost all, if not all, of his tenure as head coach. But you don't think of the Cardinals as this big juggernaut. But with Kyler Murray and different players, different coaching staffs coming in and out, they've given San Francisco problems. Let's go back to last year, week 5, I believe, 2024. Cardinals go into Santa Clara, beat the Niners 24-23. Niners were up 23-10 at halftime. Could not do anything points-wise in the second half. When you look at the game as a whole, before you dive into the reasons why they actually lost, we're going to go into that. Niners had more yards, more first downs. They converted 55% of their third downs. Arizona only converted 30%. And the Niners had a 6-minute advantage of time of possession. That was also the game, if you remember, Nick Bosa had an interception on Kyler Murray, and he was kind of rumbling past midfield. The Niners had a blocked field goal for a touchdown. But the Niners also had 3 turnovers to Arizona's 1. Brock had 2 interceptions. Jordan Mason had a fumble. Brock's second interception came on the last drive when they were down 24-23. They were just approaching midfield, winds up throwing a pass to Ayuk that got intercepted, and the game was sealed. This was also the game where they lost Jake Moody when he got run over on that kick return. They lost him late in the first half or early in the second half, but they could not kick field goals essentially for the entire second half. And they had a drive that ended at the Arizona 27 that they had to go for it on. I think it was like 4th and 23, something ridiculous, because they did not have a kicker that could have changed the game completely. I mean, now Jake Moody was an iffy proposition. So Jake Moody from 45 yards is no sure thing. But if he makes that at the time, it would have been 26-20. Let me tell you. 26-21, I guess, 26-21. So Arizona would have needed a touchdown, not a field goal, to take the lead in the fourth quarter. The Niners ran the ball really well. They didn't get to the magic number of 30 attempts, but they went 26 for 153. Cardinals ran it better. James Conner, 19 for 86. Kyler Murray, 7 for 83 and a touchdown, including a long of 50. Now, running the ball, the Niners are currently 29th in terms of yard per carry, averaging 3.2. McCaffrey and Robinson are both averaging 3.5 yards a carry. Ran the ball better in week 1 at Seattle, at least numerically, statistically, went 36 for over 100 yards. Last week, they went, I think, 26 for mid-70s. Seattle wasn't necessarily attempting to take away the run until the Niners got into the red zone. And then the Niners were stubbornly running into 8 and 9 man boxes. The Saints were daring Mac Jones to beat them, and Mac Jones did. And that came at the expense of the running game, although it was either Kyle or Analytics. Somebody said that what Christian McCaffrey did against the Saints was one of his most efficient games being a 49er. Now, that might have been run and pass combined. And he did have a good game, another, over 100 all-purpose yards. But the running game has not gotten on track, and Kyle doesn't seem to be too worried about it. The Cardinals, this is an interesting stat. They're allowing 4.7 yards per carry, which is 20th, but only 78 yards per game. And they played 2 teams with good running backs. The Saints have Alvin Kamara, and the Panthers have Chuba Hubbard. And I was expecting more from Hubbard last week. I mean, at Arizona, I have him on both of my fantasy teams. Had an okay game receiving. I think he wound up with maybe like close to 80 all-purpose yards and a touchdown. But Arizona took the run game away last week and dared Bryce Young to beat them. And it was a 1-score game. Arizona won both of their games. Was it 20-13 at New Orleans? And was it 27-22, something like that, at home against Carolina? 1-score games, just like San Francisco. 1-score game in Seattle, 1-score game at New Orleans. And they needed Nick Bosa and Bryce Huff to close out those games on defense with strip sacks to secure the victory. Injuries of note. Let's start with Arizona. The biggest thing is how banged up their secondary is. So you have cornerbacks Sean Murphy Bunting on IR or PUP, Starling Thomas on IR, and Garrett Wilson just went on IR this week. Will Johnson, the rookie out of Michigan, has a groin injury, did not practice today, Thursday. Not sure if he's going to practice at all this week. Still has the outside chance of playing. And the other cornerback, Max Melton, has a knee issue. He's been limited. So 3 of their top 6 corners are definitely not playing. Murphy Bunting, Thomas, and Garrett Williams. 4 of their top 6 corners might not play if Will Johnson can't go. This should be, regardless of a quarterback or whoever's quarterback, and we don't know yet. Again, I'm recording this Thursday night. A way that the Niners can exploit the Cardinals through the air. And Arizona's going to be dangerous. If they're going to dare Mac Jones or Brock Purdy to beat them and take McCaffrey and Brian Robinson away, that means they're stacking the box. That means they're probably putting their backup corners in man-to-man situations against Pearsall and Jennings. Kendrick Bourne, whoever else winds up suiting up at MVS, who's not going to get thrown to, whoever else gets suited up at receiver. Arizona, from their standpoint, if you're a Cardinal fan, you're looking at it going, all right, we're 2-0 as well. Our secondary is banged up, but they don't have Ayuk. They don't have Demarcus Robinson. Jennings might be a little banged up, and they don't have George Kittle. And they might not have Brock Purdy. So, yeah, let's challenge their starters, but also sort of backup receivers and tight ends with our backup secondary and still dare whoever the quarterback is to beat them, because we don't want Christian McCaffrey and the running game to beat us, even though the Niners running game hasn't beaten anybody yet so far this season, even though the season's only 2 weeks old. One of the other players of note, defensive tackle Walter Nolan, rookie out of Ole Miss, a lot of people's favorite draft crush. Really thought the Niners were going to take him at 10 or 11, wherever the heck they drafted. Can't remember at this point. He's on the physically unable to perform list, won't be available until week 5 at the earliest. For San Francisco, Kyle Juszczyk, Saran Neal, cornerback safety, they're going through concussion protocol. Jordan Watkins, I mentioned earlier, limited participant in practice today with a calf issue. And of course, Jennings a little banged up. And of course, Brock Purdy with the turf toe. As of Thursday night, here's my prediction. I don't see him starting. And I keep going back to how lucky the Niners are dodging a bullet with what happened to Joe Burrow, essentially done for the year, 3 months. Saw a crazy stat that, out of 25 quarterbacks that have had this injury, 5 never played again and retired. Now they're not getting surgery in 2025. Who knows when all of these surgeries took place time-wise. And I know they would only put him out there if they think he could protect himself. He would be in a steel-toed cleat to help protect him as well. I don't see Brock playing, but I see Brock being active. And if that means they don't have to elevate Martinez again from the practice squad, and it could be Mac, and if something happens to Mac, then Brock comes in because of the magnitude of the game. Granted, it's week 3, but it's an NFC West game. It's another NFC game, and the Niners, with a win over Arizona, can surpass their NFC West win totals just by beating the Cardinals. Would have 2 NFC West wins this year. We're 1-5 last year. So, and John Lynch was asked about that, about Brock Purdy. If he doesn't start, could he be active? Could he be a backup? Could he be the emergency number 3? I don't think there's an emergency number 3 if you're elevating Martinez from the practice squad. There's just 3 quarterbacks, and if Mac Jones gets hurt, then Kyle will determine which quarterback should go in. If Kyle gets hurt when the Niners are up 34-10, then Martinez goes in, right? Depends on the situation. But my guess right now is, and I can see it either way. If Brock can play out of the next 2 games, this is the one you want to get. You want the Arizona game for all the reasons I said. NFC West game, NFC game means more than if they drop to the Jaguars instead. But that also means if they lose to Arizona and Mac Jones is the quarterback, then I think there's more of an urgency to get Brock on the field against Jacksonville to get a win to be 3-1, because then you're going to the Rams and the Texans for the next 2. And you could very well wind up 3-3 when you're coming home after the Texans game. But let's get into some offensive keys. Biggest one is protect the football. They lost that game because they won everything but the turnover margin and the who has a healthy kicker on their roster battle, because Moody was hurt. Protect the ball. If you do that and you win the turnover battle, or it's even, no turnovers apiece, 1 apiece, whatever, they have a really good shot at winning this game. Even with the injuries, I think the Niners have a better roster than Arizona. And where Arizona is significantly depleted in the secondary, I think the Niners and Kyle, because no matter what the situation is, who the Niners are playing, even against Seattle, that vaunted or going to be vaunted Seattle secondary, Brock lit them up. Aaron Rodgers struggled mightily in Seattle versus in Pittsburgh. Protect the football. Said this earlier. Key number 2, pass to set up the run, right? If they're going to crowd the line for probably Mac, make them pay for it. They're going to have to back off at some point. You would think they're not going to keep getting torched unless they think, oh, don't worry. Let's let them pass from 20 to 20. And when they get inside the red zone, Kyle will have a brain fart and just go to running plays that won't work like he did against Seattle, and will hold them to a field goal. If you can pass at will on Arizona, then yeah, Mac should throw the ball 35 plus times. I won't be wed to that magic number of 30 plus rushes if the Cardinals are gearing up to stop it, and or they've proven to have a pretty stout run defense through 2 weeks of the season and against two teams with pretty darn good running backs, again, in Kamara and Hubbard. And key number 3, spread the ball around. Niners had 8 players catch a pass last week. That's not always the case. They're usually pretty top heavy in terms of who's catching passes. 5 players, maybe 6. But the fact that both tight ends caught a pass last week. Luke Farrell had the touchdown. Tonjes had a reception or 2 as well. I couldn't even tell you a game that 2 tight ends not named George Kittle caught the ball in the same game. Juice had a reception, wound up getting knocked out. Obviously, your receivers are going to spread it around. McCaffrey's going to have a reception, 4 or 5 receptions. Maybe B-Rob gets involved with 1 or 2. Then Jennings, Pearsall. I don't know if it's going to be MVS or if they're going to have Russell Gage come up, or if Sky Moore is going to get involved in the offense at all. Spread it around. Make the Cardinals defend everyone and every blade of grass on the field, right? Horizontal passes. Haven't seen many bubble screens. Maybe only 2 that I can think of so far this season. Neither one worked. You don't have Debo, and that's okay, but the Debo plays don't disappear. Except you don't need to have a wide receiver as a running back anymore because McCaffrey's healthy so far. You have Brian Robinson. Guerendo got a lot of playing time last season. And for every week that Guerendo doesn't really play, and he's playing on kickoff returns, but if he only gets tackled 4 times a game, helping the shoulder heal, right? Jordan James was healthy enough to be on the roster, just not active. Or no, I'm not even sure if he was inactive or not last week, but the finger has gotten better to the point where he can play. Defense, the number one thing is contain Kyler. We all know this. Fred Warner knows this. Robert Saleh knows this. He said it's about putting a whole bunch of small mouse traps out there for him, not because Kyler is short. He's just basically saying a lot of we want him, surround him with pitfalls, right? It's not one big thing. It could be a dozen smaller things. And even Warner says, you're not going to completely shut him down, but you got to limit the damage. You can't have, like last year, a 50-yard run, consecutive broken plays, right? And the crazy thing, we know the Niners have struggled with Kyler Murray, and we know they've struggled with mobile quarterbacks. From the last 3 seasons, 2022 to 2024, the Niners have allowed the 12th most rushing yards per game to quarterbacks. I thought it was more than that. I thought they would have been in the top 5, to be honest, but they don't, they're not in the NFC North that they play Lamar Jackson twice, or playing Josh Allen twice. Outside of Kyler Murray, you have Matt Stafford, you've had Geno Smith, who wasn't really running around. Sam Darnold's not going to run around. So the Niners, maybe the volume, the number of quarterbacks that are running, they don't have that. I thought the yardage would have been more than that, but when they do play a mobile quarterback, they struggle. And it goes hand in hand with, if you can control Kyler, who's only gone game 1, 7 for 38, game 2, 7 for 32. Now you could say, well, he's due to break out against the Niners. If you can hold him to like 7 for 35, that's a win. 5 yards a carry is still good clip, whether you're a quarterback or a running back, but that's a win. And if you can hold the Cardinals as a whole, Connor, Trey Benson, Kyler Murray under 100, you got a tremendous shot of winning this game. Can they do that? I don't know. So, Arizona went for 146 yards against New Orleans on 27 carries week 1. Against Carolina, a little more than half that, 22 rushes for 82 yards and 1 touchdown. Even if you keep them somewhere in between, say that they're at 110, 115. That's still a recipe for victory against this team. And lastly, Murray's going to pass it. Now I have a dilemma. I have Kyler Murray and Justin Herbert on the same fantasy team. Herbert's at home against the Broncos. Murray's at San Francisco. It's interesting. Rushing wise, they've both been averaging about the same number of rushing yards a game in the mid 30s. I don't know who I want to start here. It might just be Kyler Murray to hedge my bet in terms of if he's breaking the Niners' hearts, he's helping my fantasy team for whatever that's worth. And I think the Broncos defense is better than the Niners defense at this point in the season. It'll probably be a better defense than the Niners throughout all the season. But if San Francisco take one away, limit either Marvin Harrison Jr. or Trey McBride. They both had a pretty big week one where they both had, I think, 6 or more receptions. Week 2 against Carolina, Marvin Harrison only had 2 receptions. I think McBride had another 5 or 6. You're not going to be able to take both of them away. And you can't choose who you want to take away, but if you can limit one, then you have like the Michael Wilsons of the world trying to beat you. Zay Flowers, established receivers, but you don't want their big 3, Harrison, McBride, and Connor, to all go nuts or to all have pretty good games. And obviously you have Kyler Murray as the trigger man. I could live with 2 of the 3. Say Connor goes for about 70 or 80 yards, McBride or Harrison, the same sort of thing. One would be ideal. I don't know if that's going to happen, but at least from a receiving standpoint, try to limit one of those players. Now, prediction-wise, this is such a big game, not only because both teams are 2-0, but because the Rams are at the Eagles. And the Eagles haven't looked great, and neither have the Rams. I mean, the Rams beat the Texans by a score week 1, and the Texans had the ball in the red zone when their running backs wound up fumbling. And the Rams wound up, winning week 2 with a little bit more cushion. But if the Eagles, regardless who loses that game, someone's 2-1 behind San Francisco if they're 3-0. And if it's the Rams losing that game, then the Niners are by themselves atop the NFC West with a tiebreaker over Arizona right now. And like I, talked about it earlier, if you get to 3-0, it's 3 NFC wins, 2 in the NFC West, where they were 1-5 last season. Again, this game is more important than the Jacksonville game. They're all important, guys. All of them are important, but you can weight them, right? You can say which game's more important than another. An NFC game is always going to be more important than an AFC game. An NFC West game is going to be more important than a regular NFC game. But if you can start stacking wins, get to 3-0, and let's say Brock doesn't play and he plays against Jacksonville, and you can get to 4-0, knowing you have the Rams and Texans coming up, games that the Niners could very easily drop both of those. You want, even if you can go 3-1, you lose maybe in that instance one of the next 2, or even lose the next 2 games, you're 3-3. But to be maybe potentially 4-0 going into probably your toughest stretch of the season, which is early, and they're back-to-back games at the Rams and at the Texans, it gives you some cushion, right? And if you can get that Rams game too, that will be phenomenal, right? I think the Niners with injuries and the Cardinals with their own injuries, they still match up well with Arizona. When I went back, that last week of the season game at Arizona, where Arizona put up like 47 points, whatever it was, Josh Dobbs played pretty well, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Patrick Taylor, running back at the time, went over 100 yards. The Niners defense, I think, kind of packed it in. They came out and played the Lions pretty hard in the week before on Monday night. But again, they let up, I think, over 40 in that game, over 40 against the Cardinals. I think they didn't quit, but I think they were kind of more or less done with the whole Nick Sorensen experiment. And the way they lost week 5, 3 turnovers to 1, not having Moody for field goals, right? And you could even look at it and say, from the flip side, well, they also got a special teams touchdown on that blocked field goal return. So you could say the offense really wasn't firing on all cylinders. That's fair too. But that's a game they were up 23-10. Felt in control, like the Rams game before that. like the Seahawk game and the Saints game this year, you felt like even though they weren't big leads, there was no 13-point. Well, the Niners were up, 26-14. So they had a 12 or whatever it was, a 12-point lead against Arizona. They had a 13-point lead against the Saints, rather. 12-point lead against the Saints, 13-point lead against Arizona last year. First 2 weeks of the season, again, those were games that felt like games last year where they were up, whether it was 1 score, 2 scores, felt like the Niners were in control, and they faded down the stretch. With at least Saleh's defense, his rotation, his game plan, his play calling, players are going to get tired from the first quarter through the fourth quarter, obviously, right? But they're going to I think they're going to be more prepared to make stops when they need to. This season, specifically this week against Arizona and Kyler Murray, I think the Niners win a close one, 23-20, to propel themselves to 3-0 and first place in the NFC West, no matter what the Rams do, because the Niners would have 2 NFC West wins and the Rams with just 1 or none, actually, at this point. So fingers crossed, right? 3-0. 4-0 would look really good. I'm not trying to get greedy here, but again, you got a couple tough games coming up, 2 away games, and Kyler has given them problems. The Cardinals have given Kyle problems. 7 wins and 19 losses in his 16 matchups. Who would have thought that? But a big early NFC West game as the Niners continue to keep that upward trend and build upon what they've shown in Seattle and New Orleans in weeks 1 and 2 and extend their winning streak, hopefully to 3 against Kyler Murray and the Cardinals. With that, we're going to conclude the podcast. Like always, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to make us part of your listening and watching routine. Thursday night, Bills Dolphins are on now. Might be close to halftime. I'm not sure if you're watching that or watch that. Past tense. Hope you enjoyed it. Whatever you guys are doing between now and when we speak again, either Sunday night or Monday, the reaction show to this as big as you can get NFC West tilt in week 3. Stay happy, healthy, and safe. We will talk soon all. Take care.